Hello, everyone. Lovely to have you all here. It is 6 p.m. in South Africa. I'm not exactly sure where all of you are from. We'll go through that introduction just now to have an idea where everyone is coming in from. Oh, and I don't have my slides at the right place. That doesn't work really well. Let me start from scratch. Lovely to have you all here. This is part of a series. We are running webinars. It's free webinars to actually present a lot around case studies. There's a lot of people who are using Century Intelligence as a framework with various clients. And I'm always astounded by people that has been through our training sessions and has been through our accredited course and how they have actually been implementing this with their clients. So thank you all for being here. And particularly thanks to people that committed to sharing their case studies with us tonight. So they are Stephanie Warner, Karen Levy-Strauss, and Queen Ramotsehoa. These are all people in the coaching framework who has been using the Century Intelligence work with their particular clients. So, and it's really from insight to impact. What is really happening with this information at a client level, and something that I feel quite strongly about. So we're just going to run through that. Um, just some housekeeping. Remember, we are on a webinar format or a meeting format, not a webinar format. So if you can just keep yourself muted, that's really great. But people are usually quite great with that. But maybe in the chat box, can you just pop in where are you based? What is your background so that we have some sort of an idea of who are the people in the room? There's always loads of people who sign up, and some of your faces and your names are very familiar, and some of us I'm not so familiar with. So if you can just pop in the chat box, where are you from? I'm going to try to make sure that I read through some of them, which is always great to see. Um, oh, Canada, Heather. Another one from Canada, South Africa, Rihanna, thank you. Stephanie, you're from California, Washington State, UK, Cornwall, South Africa, Boston. Awesome. Switzerland. Oh, that's really great. So from Edinburgh, hello, Luzon. Lovely to see you as well. So some nice old faces here. And then Mexico. Awesome. Thank you guys for being and sharing with us. Keep on popping that in the chat box. Is there anyone here who's totally unfamiliar with Century Intelligence, who haven't done any exposure to our brand before? Maybe if you want to just put your hand up. Oh, Bernice, I can see your hand is up. Let me have an idea. I'll have to change to different screens. It's always good for me to know if there's anyone who hasn't been exposed. Antoinette, you as well. Okay, brilliant. I often do a bit of a rehash briefly to just contextualize where Century Intelligence is from. But often, repetition is brilliant for our brains. We learn by repetition, but that really also does help. I just want to warn you, we will be launching a poll just a little bit later on the webinar. Please just add your name and your CPD number to it if you want CPD points. We have accredited the webinars for CPD points. This makes our life easier because to try to match names with the registration afterwards is a bit of a nightmare because the groups are fairly big. We've got 50 people on the call already. That just makes it easier for us to generate your CPD credentials fairly easy. All right, so thanks for that. Okay, any questions in the chat box? Mankateko is my co-facilitator, so if there's any questions that you have, don't hesitate, pop them in. There will be time for questions, and then we will run through them. All right. There will also be a recording. We will share that with you afterwards. So if you wanted to look at the recording afterwards, that's also available for you. Okay. I'm going to do three things. I'll just do a context and a framework for you around Century Intelligence. I love the coaching methodology. I was introduced to coaching many, many years ago. And I think the shift for me, moving out of clinical practice, working with diagnostic groups, as opposed to working with healthy people in a coaching framework, was something that I absolutely loved. And I've met so many great coaches over the years. And I think the coaching framework and working problem or solution focus has been quite instrumental in a lot of my thinking on how I've really developed a lot around the Century Intelligence process. So I'll give you that framework. The real world case studies are going to be done by three people on the call. and then we will do Q&A right towards the end. Okay. I am going to do a sense check. It's a 60 seconds quick way for us just to set the scene. We also call it as part of our Take Five practice. We are currently running two big projects with two corporate clients, and every time when we see ourselves, we bring them back to the Take Five practice. I'm going to let you just sit with it a little bit with me. I think it just helps us to set the scene for what is it that we do in a coaching framework. So let's hope that you can release your mind a little bit, and I'll take you through these Take Five principles. They're not going to take us longer than 60 seconds. The first one is stop. Something that I struggle with. Can we sometimes just stop whatever we're busy doing? I think the stop action is just preparing the body and the brain. And pause obviously comes after that. I think pause is such an important way for us just to start to be aware of what is going in our environment. So if you can also just pause for a few seconds. And then the magic of deep breathing. If you just want to spend a little bit of time to deep breathe, it also just creates more internal awareness to where's your body, where's your mind. And then it is about look. So look beyond what you are seeing, look further than what just the eyes can see. And also listen. And we are listening with the whole body, not just listening what goes on around us. And these five steps are often ways to help us to just be more present. So it's the internal conditions for presence. And we don't do mindfulness at Century Intelligence. I love mindfulness, but what I'm trying to say here is whenever we need to have any change or people creating some sort of awareness, these five very natural sense check processes helps us to get a point of being very much present, which is something that I think coaches are absolute masters on getting with their clients. And then I want to ask you one of my favorite questions. If time, money, and resources were not hurdles, what would you be doing now and where would you be? And I wish we had time to unpack with each that question or that answer with each and every one of you, but we don't have time. We always reflect on this question when we go through our training, and I couldn't resist. I've put Italy up there. And since I've started this course, and I think Queen, you were probably one of the first ones that did this course with me, I always ask, what is it that you would be doing? And then my answer was always Italy. And I'm very happy to report that I will be going to Italy the 18th of August this year. So it took me a long time, but I am going. So just reflecting back on what is deep in your body, what is it that you want? And it's a really nice question because it really is being, I think, answered by your body and not necessarily by your mind. Okay. So, with that context, let's then just move a little bit into the more serious stuff. I think probably a lot of you are familiar with this. When I work through my PhD and my research, a lot of what I'm doing is sensory intelligence and the sensory processing framework within occupational therapy, but there's a load of information in the psychology world who also contributes to sensory processing sensitivity. But if you really go look at the data quite in depth, we are saying similar things. We're just taking it from a bit of different perspectives, but we do know 20 to 30% of the general population has got what we call high scores on sensory processing sensitivity. In our world, you've got low thresholds on our sensory identity assessments, and that's clearly being documented in the literature. The other one that I think is kind of scary, stress, sleep, and quality of life. We also know people who are more sensitive to their environment and being impacted on a sensory level. It is linked with higher stress and disruptive sleep, which obviously negatively impact our physical and our mental health. And well-being is also the quality of our life. If you've been to our mental health webinar There's so much research and literature being documented to show that sensory processing is a correlation and an indication to how well people are performing on a mental health and well-being perspective. And then this was interesting. I picked this up recently. Overstimulation peaks in the afternoon to early evening, and particularly around other people, especially when visual or auditory input feels unpleasant or when we are fatigued. That's also been documented. And I think that's where we go into, it's interesting, we are doing this webinar at, what do we call it, suicide hour or happy hour, towards the end of the day when we've all had our long days. I think, Stephanie, or those of you in the US, it's morning for you, it's afternoon for us at this stage, at this part of the world. But our bodies and our brains are just more tired towards the end of the day, and particularly those people with sensitive nervous systems. And again, it's visual and auditory. The auditory system is the culprit. We are very much overstimulated by that. So it's just interesting to see how our environment and our senses has got such a strong impact on how we feel and operate. So in other words, a meaningful share of your clients are navigating this already, whether they've got the language for it or not. And I think this has been my biggest learning curve over the years. It provides a different layer of language. Karen, like you also said, a different narrative on what is happening in my world, what is happening in my environment, what is happening in my body. And one of the key things that we've seen with this work, it's so empowering for our clients to think and to understand my nervous system is overloaded. It's not that I'm picky or difficult. So there's a huge level of empowerment. What most models miss here, we often focus on mindset, behavior, or performance, but really, the underneath all human functioning is sensory processing. It is the invisible system that shapes how people feel, their emotion, how they perform, their attention, and how they cope their behavior. These are three core facets that's being influenced by how our brains process sensory information. So sensory intelligence really helps us make the invisible visible. And this is our image that we use quite a lot. Your seven senses constantly is being flooded into your brain via the environment, and it constantly shapes our regulation and our performance. And we've got seven senses. I'm not going to go through them in detail. Each of these seven senses has got its own threshold, and together they determine how regulated, focused, resourced someone feels. And it is a primitive, unconscious part of how the brain functions. It's not the awareness or the conscious bit, it's really the unconscious part. Which is why I love this nervous system hierarchy. The brain first would sense, then it feels, and then it thinks, because information enters at the bottom and at the bottom only. So we know sensory input goes via the nervous system. And it's important to remember this. There's the nervous system processing happens from the external environment being fed through to the brain. Then it helps us to feel regulated, and it's got a huge impact on our emotion. And then it influences our thinking, behavior, and performance. And this is usually where I get CEOs converted into seeing this as a benefit for workplace clients. If we can influence the senses, environments, activities, and we match people better in a workplace, we unlock their cognition, we unlock cognitive ability, and that always gets enough credentials and credibility from decision makers. All right, and that obviously leads us to the Sensory Matrix. This is a tool that I've designed, pure frustration from my PhD research. I wasn't happy with the tools at the time. They weren't giving me what I wanted to use for my clients. And the Sensory Matrix is a test that I've started the first version in 2005 already. Oh my word, I'm old, but anyway. Most people spend years managing these systems with ever even managing the source. And I've got so many clients over the years who said one session of just understanding my sensory identity through my sensory matrix has changed the world for me. Then we can pinpoint regulation risk, and these targeted strategies build around you, but it's simple. It's not complex. It's simple, it's practical, and it can be implemented straight away. So really in our world, know your senses, change your life. There's a sign there for us, Mankateko, to just launch the poll. So if the poll comes up, guys, please just add your name and your CPD number so that we can just provide you with those credentials for you to submit. So feel free to do that. Mankateko is going to keep the poll up as we go through. Okay, now I must just get it in front of my screen so that I can see you. I don't like not being able to see you all. All right. So what we are going to do now, thank you so much, Stephanie. Stephanie Warner actually completed our course a while back. She's one of our licensed practitioners. Stephanie, I would love for you to introduce yourself to the group because you do such fascinating and interesting work. And then I will just take you through or I will move the slides on for you. Then you can talk to us about your very, very interesting client. Over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, like she said, I'm in Southern California and I have a consulting practice where I work with professional women to help first and foremost see their wardrobe as a work environment, and we make changes so that it's not draining from their capacity and contributing to that overstimulation that they feel. And then we also work beyond that in their relationships, in their home life, and also in their work environment itself. And it's been a really fascinating and empowering process for my clients. And my bigger goal that goes beyond the senses is for women and men in general, but women are who I generally work with, is that when they stop pushing down discomfort in their environment, whether it's their clothes or their office space, they are strengthening a muscle that allows them to not accept discomfort in other places of their life. And it becomes this empowering tool where they start renegotiating how like norms are set up in their marriage or in their work environments, setting better boundaries with their kids. Um, I really see this as more than just wardrobe help or small little environmental changes. I really see this. It helps change the scaffolding of the person in general. And so I just love this work. So we'll move on to our client. Kate is not her real name, but Kate is a 40-year-old attorney. She came to me primarily with an interest in needing to get a professional outfit together for a conference that's coming up in Las Vegas. For those of you who have not visited Las Vegas before, it is just like the movies. It's incredibly overstimulating and an absolute sensory nightmare for somebody, really, I would imagine for anyone. She is training for an Ironman. She's very athletic. She likes long runs and long swims. She has a lifelong depression and anxiety diagnosis. She also has sleep apnea, and all of that's moderately controlled with medication. And she has a psychologist that she sees. She gets late afternoon migraines, which she's intuitive about. She feels that that's because of this overstimulation and specifically the visual drain. She's married, and it sounds like her husband is a very high leaf. He's an adrenaline junkie. Um, and we're trying to get him to do the matrix. They don't have children and do not plan to have children. She works at home and has a private office, and she also has a private office in her workplace. And she's allowed to dress casually, which was actually one of the reasons she took the position at this law firm. She used to work somewhere else where she had to go to court and dress more formally, but she intuitively knew that was a mismatch, and so she sought out a different law firm. She's, like I mentioned, she's a swimmer and marathon runner, but she does have a shoulder injury, and so she's been focusing more on cycling, the cycling aspect of the Ironman, um, which has been a bummer for her because she really does enjoy swimming, and she is, like I mentioned, she's a casual dresser. She likes to wear, I'd say she kind of still dresses like a teenager, even though she's like a comfy teenager, even though she's in her 40s. Um, with the conference, one of the main struggles was how am I going to get through this conference? I have markers that I need to meet. I have people I need to meet, connections I need to form. But I know she intuitively knows that this is a very overstimulating and draining environment for her. So as we worked together, exploring why she came, we were able to get those goals, but then realize that it went much further than just what am I going to wear to a conference? It was her home life and her work environment, and then also managing the energy for this conference. So you can move on to the next slide. So, as you can see, she was intuitively very correct. She is a deep, deep root at -40. And what I found really interesting is that her multisensory score is very, very low, and same with her visual score. Really, all of her scores are low. But the really low multisensory score really matched the way that she described her overwhelm. For her, just waking up and existing in this world is incredibly painful for her. So it is really amazing that she um, is functioning the way that she is with and living in a home with a husband who, like I said, he sounds like he's a very high sensory seeker. Um, and then she also has this depression and anxiety diagnosis that has been lifelong. It's been a painful for her. So seeing these scores, while it was not surprising for her, it was also very validating for her because a relational dynamic that happens is her husband and herself and her family attribute a lot of her depressive symptoms throughout the day as like uncontrolled depression, or she's not doing enough things. But really, her environment is her home environment in particular is set up for a sensory seeker, not so much for herself. So this became like a very validating tool for her. And as you'll see in the next slides, that became part of her treatment plan was shifting that self-talk and then providing education to her husband. So the four areas that we're focusing on first, and this is a client I'm currently working with, is first and foremost her home environment. She lives in a new build, and they're slowly choosing what spaces are going to be what, and they're building out a reading room right now for her. And we had talked about she needs a place for sensory deprivation. It's complete shutting down of all the senses, which she doesn't have at the moment. But they are building out a reading. Well, it's actually done now. They were building out a reading room, and with comfy chairs for her and her husband, the bookshelf. But he likes to bring in crazy art, and so I had suggested keeping white walls or blank walls, putting in blackout curtains, and then having a basket for like a weighted blanket and earphones. And so she has started using that as a complete sensory deprivation zone that she uses when she comes in from work, um, as a transition time, and she's experimenting with how long. And then she also uses that before she has to go out and be social. Her desk, very cluttered. So just a complete it's hard for her to keep everything clean, but at least in her workspace, the first goal is just an uncluttered line of sight. And in her home gym, she often has to do long runs in a basement gym. And so right now, she only had like bright overhead lights, and then she has to watch TV to like keep her motivated. And so we talked about low stim shows and using a plug-in lamp. Like these are really easy things that just don't occur to somebody until another person helps them kind of problem solve. And then in terms of her training, this is where things got really interesting. She's talking about how she likes Ironmans, but as you can see from her sensory matrix, she has a very low vestibular score, a very low multisensory score, or sorry, movement score. And she knew that. She gets very seasick, very car sick. She knows she has poor balance and she hates cycling. And so I challenged her on this piece of she's she's trying to train herself in cycling while avoiding rehabbing her shoulder. And her shoulder is what's preventing her from swimming, which is a very good fit for her very low multisensory score. So that is something that she's considering right now is what is the reason she's wanting to do the Ironman? It sounds like it's a vanity goal. She's done it before and she wants to beat that score. But really reinforcing that these long distance runs and these swims are so good for her multisensory score because the movement becomes repetitive. It's smaller ranges of motion than like a soccer game. Her line of sight really gets narrowed in on what she's doing, and it's a very good fit. And so she never had considered that. She just knew she was drawn to these activities. And so bringing in that training aspect, because she's already a natural athlete, and then using her sensory matrix to help her choose which activities she should be spending her time on. I think she's really taken that consideration, and she's actually already scheduled her shoulder rehab. It's just not started yet. And so for the conference, she really wants to wear sneakers. And so that's where I helped her figure out how she can build professional looking outfits around sneakers and pre-planning those out. Her conference is in about a month out. And so she's getting many, many packages of clothing, of things that she never would have considered. And she also has, I didn't mention before, but she also has irritable bowel disease. So helping her find professional looking outfits that do have the elastic waistbands, more open necklines so that she doesn't feel constricted throughout the day. And just validating that she doesn't have to look like all of these catalogs of what it means to be a professional person. Um, so we took a look at the dress code for her conference and made sure everything was in line. And then another really big thing was looking at her actual schedule for the conference and figuring out, okay, what is absolutely mandatory and what is not. So we have her doing her runs in the morning, taking breakfast in her room. And then Las Vegas, you often have to walk through casinos to get to places. So we have her bringing earplugs and actually like incognito nose plugs for her if she doesn't feel comfortable wearing a face mask, but she will also have a face mask with her. And she carries everybody carries a water bottle around these days. And so she already does the spout water bottle. And then another aspect of it was having an accountability partner and knowing who at her law firm who is senior to her that she would need to report to if she needs to leave. So she has a plan like, I know who I need to text if I need to leave. And I have an accountability partner um, who can check in on me. Hey, it's 6 o'clock. Don't stay out and go out for drinks after if you don't have to. Like get to your room because you have this bigger goal of tomorrow. Um, you have these metrics you need to hit tomorrow. Looking at the plan, the evening activities are like it to me here in the States, it's like a senior grad night. It's just like very silly activities that are very high stim for her that she may have to do. And then for the relationships, like I said, just validating her experience and that her sensory environment is really hard for her and educating her husband and like I said, encouraging him to take the sensory matrix and then discussing the aspects around touch versus his needs and her needs and reframing it that giving her control can help with a lot of these relational like butting heads that happen between them. And I think my last slide is my outcomes and what we're working on. And I've pretty much talked about that, she's implementing those sensory deprivation breaks. She's created that space in her gym and her home for those sensory deprivation. Her negative self-talk is really shifting, which is like a huge improvement because she has been in therapy her whole entire life. And this was the one thing that made her really see that I am doing a good job managing my depression and anxiety to the best of my abilities, but here's something I can do in the environment. Like she's done what she can with her internal resources, but what can I do in my environment that can help me? I think she feels much more empowered knowing that I'm helping her with a plan for her conference. And like I said, she's already made plans to rehab her shoulder, something she had been putting off. And so, really, my takeaway for Kate is that she came to me as a lawyer who wanted help with an outfit for a conference. But what she's gotten instead is her and her husband have a much greater understanding of who she is as a person so that they can pre-negotiate how they're going to live their life together so that they're both comfortable and she doesn't spend every day thinking that something is wrong with her. And that is what I think is really amazing about the consulting space and the wellness consulting space for these people.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Yeah, when Stephanie spoke to me about this client, I'm like, you've got to share it in our webinar. So thank you so much. It is so fascinating. I know you're busy working with her, so we would love to hear the end story. And it sounds like you're already doing a great, great job. So keep it up and keep us posted. We would love to
Yeah, of
know the next chapter. So thanks for sharing that. Okay,
course.
so Karen, over to you. Karen, you just unmute yourself, please. Oh,
Yeah,
there you go. Awesome.
super. So thank you so much for the opportunity to chat. I decided that I was going to just tell you some stories as opposed to have a slide deck because Death by PowerPoint doesn't always work for me. So I am a full-time learning specialist for one of the big banks in South Africa. And I'm about 2.5 years away from retirement. And so I've been on a journey for the last 5 years to get myself upskilled so that I can have a second career. And that second career is around professional coaching, which is the integral coaching you see on the screen. And when I was busy with my integral coaching, I was in the middle of COVID and discovered that quite a number of the people that I was coaching were also struggling with suicide, depression, anxiety. And I just could not get it past myself to get to the place where you have to say, it's taken you so long to get to make an appointment with me. Now I can't help you. You need to move on and go somewhere else. And so I then signed up to do a narrative therapy qualification, which is based on the work by Michael White from Australia. He was a social worker. And in my last 3 years with coaching, 2 years with narrative therapy, I've really found that talk therapy or talk coaching shifts some things, but it doesn't necessarily shift to the level that an individual needs to shift until you include their body and their senses. And I took the sensory intelligence program with Anna Marie about 2 years ago, and then started to use this methodology in my coaching. And so the first story I'd like to talk to you about is a gentleman by the name of Andy. And Andy was pre-retirement, and he was wanting to really just rearrange his life so that he had some goals for after he retired, because we also know from statistics that if people retire without a proper plan and without necessarily having something to do after retirement, very quickly they drop into deeper depression and often die very quickly after retirement. So Andy and I worked a journey together, and in one of his sessions, he kept just saying, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. And eventually I said to him, well, if you did know, where would you go? And who in your life would you want to be with that can give you some of the answers that you don't know to? And he spoke about his grandfather, and we unpacked the whole sensory piece around his grandfather specifically. Where would they go? They'd go out into the garden. What would they smell? What would they be seeing? And then I said to him, and where would you feel your grandfather's presence in your life? And he went, in my heart. And he touched his heart like that. And every single session after that, when he was getting to a place where he didn't know or he was uncertain about something, I would say, okay, so who could we connect with? And he'd say, my grandfather. And it wasn't even a conscious thing for him. He would immediately just touch his heart. And so that sensory intelligence really just penetrates deeply into your brain. The second client that I used this on was a client who struggles with addiction. Her children have been taken away from her, and she is in a group that I volunteer at, and she's then my client that I'm working with. And she was struggling with the difference between reality and what was real for her and what was imagined for her. And we used an exercise where I asked her to visualize a plate in front of her with a lemon. And I'm going to do that with all of you now. So imagine a plate in front of you with a slice of lemon on it. And now I want you to look at that lemon. What do you notice about the lemon? What's the texture? How thick or thin is it? What is the vibrancy of the colors that you see? Now, I want you to imagine yourself smelling that lemon. Can you smell it? That fresh sharp smell of lemon. And lastly, what I'd like you to do is to take that lemon and take a bite. And what you notice is that you get a lot of saliva in your mouth and your whole mouth pulls, because that is what your brain does, is that in the visualization, it cannot differentiate between what's real and what's not real. And when we then get into a place where we have a lot of emotion, it's to start to ask yourself, is this real for me? And if it's real for me, what is the evidence that I have that it's real? And we use that to unpack when feelings needed to be taken notice of, and when feelings maybe could be tipping into that space where a craving could happen, or something's going to happen in her environment that perhaps she's going to make an impulsive choice that may not be good for her or for her choices. And we also, with this particular client, only a couple of weeks ago, about a week and a half ago, we completed the sensory matrix, and she comes in as a high leaf, which is very impulsive, which is exactly where she gets herself into trouble. And so we spoke about the tree, but we also spoke about the tree of life, because in narrative therapy, there is an exercise where you take your narrative, your life, and you unpack what are the roots, what are the things that is your background and where you come from. And then what's your trunk, what's your values, what's the things that keep you in play or in the place where you need to be. And then the leaves are your relationships. And so we use these two trees to really unpack for her how these things land in her space. And then the very last area that I've used quite extensively, I'm busy with a couple therapy, a couple who live in China. They're South Africans, but they live in China, and they've had a lot of conflict in their relationship. And so we used the window of tolerance with them, where we unpacked when a particular conflict situation unravels in their environment. What is their tendency in terms of their window of tolerance? Do they go into fight mode, flight mode, fawn, or freeze? And in being able to talk through those 4 different ways that different people show up, it was very clear that the husband was the one who was often going into fight mode, and she was often going into freeze mode. And then that caused more conflict, because he would be wanting her to immediately be sorting out where they're at, and she would need some reflection time to be able to work through it. And so that window of tolerance to then say, if I'm stepping into the orange zone, can I tap into my senses to say, what is uncomfortable in the situation? And can I keep myself in that situation just slightly longer than I would normally be comfortable? And at what point do I then say, listen, I can't, I need a time out in that? So the aspects of the sensory intelligence has definitely helped me to unpack for my clients a little bit further than just the talk therapy, because people can feel it in their body. They can use their senses to give examples and reasons of why this is not working for them, and they can make very different choices. So that's my stories.
Thank you so much, Karen. I really do appreciate that. Yeah, as I say, that Karen story versus Stephanie's story and case studies are so different, but it just shows you how enriching you can use this framework to unlock. And I remember, Karen, I was really taken by you were saying it's really when you brought in the sensory element, people could move forward with the narrative, with the thinking and the feeling, and then the talking. So that's really, really awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And then Queen, over to you. Queen and I have met each other many, many years ago. So she's a lady very close to my heart. So Queen, thank you so much for spending your precious time. So I'm gonna over to you. Queen is involved in personal mastery, but you can also just share with the group what your background in your work is mostly about.
Cool. Thank you. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. It's lovely to say all of that. It's amazing. So I'm in the personal mastery space within the context of leadership culture in organizations. So our belief that self-management and self-leadership precede the ability to lead others and manage others. So the early stages of any coaching process focuses a lot in people just acknowledging who they are, spending time with who they are, appreciating who they are. So the sensory intelligence profile is one of the profiles that we do that we use to increase people's self-awareness, self-knowledge, and gives language, because with language things are able to come to the foreground, and whatever is in the foreground people are able to work with. While it's still part of everything else and there's confusion, it's difficult to get a grasp of what is this, what does it mean, how does it impact me, and what do I want to do with what I know. So in that space, blended program of group sessions and individual sessions. And the case study that I'm going to share is a lady who was part of a women leadership program. And what was interesting about her is when we did the profile, she was just, everything was just in the middle, almost like indifferent. And if we talk about the behavioral response, she was almost unconscious. It's almost like a self-preservation strategy to just disconnect. And she was safer when she was not engaging anything, because then she doesn't have to think, she doesn't have to feel, and she doesn't have to do anything with what she's thinking and feeling and seeing. And the biggest impact was at home, because she had been estranged with her husband, so her husband moved out. And when her husband moved out, unfortunately, her mom moved in, her sister moved in with a baby, and she had 2 adult sons. So in no time, her dream house that they had just completed building was overtaken by her family, and her mom occupied the main bedroom. Her sons had to share a room. And she was just floating. She didn't see it happen, it happened. And what also happened was it blocked her availing herself to engage with the husband so that they can reconcile. Because then logistically, reconciling was not going to work, because her husband couldn't come back home, because she took responsibility for hosting her mom and her sister's child, and she had so she was just disconnected. And obviously that showed up at work, because even at work she couldn't connect with who she is, her skill set, her vision, her passion, her ambition to grow. She just stayed in existing. So the profile, the sensory report enabled both of us to acknowledge and look, and for me to ask the question, are you numb against your life? Are you disconnected? How is this numbness protecting you? And is it protecting you from what? So that what must happen? And just unpacking that and giving her the opportunity to see it. And she really did see it. And she realized the impact on herself, just on herself, her inability to just enjoy her home. She dreaded going home, because home was just not where she wanted to be. One, she was guilty because she looked at her sons and she knew that she was doing them dirty, basically. What is this? Because their home had just been taken over. So she was also avoiding her children. resentment towards mom, who had just taken over and taken the best part in her home, her bedroom, her bathroom, and then resentment towards the sister, yet unable to have those conversations with them. So the long and short of it is then we started the process of clarifying who are you, what do you want, why do you want it, how are you going to get it, what could possibly go wrong, because she needed to also confront the fear of what she could possibly lose if she confronts her reality and she calls out and she asks for certain things to be done. Worked through that and got her to where she started having the conversations, firstly with the sister, and got contracting with the sister to get organized and move out. There were dates in there. Contracting with her mom, which was most difficult because even though she was contracting with her mom, she was not able to move her mom out of her bedroom. But she sort of put some boundaries, which didn't help much, but it sort of gave her a bit of space. She had to confront her sons. She had to sit down with her children and listen to how they felt and be in the presence of how resentful they were, how bitter and upset they were because they felt that she didn't protect them, she gave away their home, and they had to start putting systems in place. What is crazy is for her to now create her own space, given that she was not able to move her mom out of her bedroom, she actually built another house which was her escape. So she looked forward to going, just the process of building was already healing for her, because it almost was a physical thing that gave her the freedom, the confirmation that she can actually free herself. And out of that, what was also interesting is because she built a beautiful home in one of the rural areas, she got a lot of offers to help people build houses. So she established a building business in the process, right? But in the
Awesome.
end, in the end, just the owning who she is, what she wants, what she deserves, and also appreciating that she has a right to what she really wants, and honoring her sons, because the situation took so long that I don't even think reconnecting with the husband was even possible. But at least she was able to salvage everything else.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Queen. And it makes me think about, we always talk about people with neutral thresholds. They are the trunk of the tree. Are these people that's constantly mediating everyone else in their lives, and their own needs always are put last. So it's so, so interesting that you talk about a client who's got those neutral scores. And we do find that there's this disconnection between who am I and what are my needs. So thank you so much for sharing that case study. It is exceptionally powerful. It always is great for me to listen to all of these stories. And again, I am putting it out here. You have to all keep me accountable. I am working with my statistician, and I want to compile a whole publication of 30 case studies by the end of the year, so that we can see what are the trends that we are seeing, and also then provide a framework for us to use for case studies going forward. So you can keep me accountable to that one. It is something that I feel very strongly about. Thank you so much, Queen. So, if you are thinking, how do I learn this? How do I apply this properly? How do I integrate this into my current work? How can you use the Sentry Intelligence or Sentry Matrix to grow your revenue and to grow your own income? I mean, you can definitely sign up if you haven't done so. We've got 2 versions. We do have an extensive practitioner's course where we take people through the learning in a blended format to learn all of the Sentry Intelligence theory, research, application, and then obviously how do we apply it? It's all accredited. But then the exciting thing that we're currently working on as well is how do we then build a community and an ecosystem for people who want to use this on an ongoing basis, where we do provide support and resources and tools for you to actually grow your practice and obviously make a difference with the clients that you are working with. And those are also people that could purchase the Sentry Matrix at a much reduced rate. So if you are interested, there is a QR code, but you can always follow up with us. Then just this is the one that we are doing today. So we've done an initial info session, one on mental health, anxiety, depression, one on neurodiversity last time. The next one in August will be around relationships. So Stephanie, it would be interesting to hear what's happening with your client and that relationships and maybe yours as well, Queen. And then how do we impact that from a workplace or a family perspective? Relationships is something that's very close to my heart. And then in the 20th of October, we will be talking about century inclusive design. I'm on my way to Amsterdam. There is a conference. There's a lot of traction and new development into the design space. So we'll be sharing that as we go through. And then, yes, we do have time for questions. Mankateko, is there any questions in the chat box in the meantime? But guys, we have 10 minutes. Awesome. I was a little bit concerned that we won't have time. Any questions, you can either pop them in the chat box or you are also welcome to unmute yourself. But if you unmute, you also have to show us your face. There's too many black screens that I don't necessarily like. But you're also welcome to ask a question. So please throw us with your questions. We've got great resources in the room. So if there's anyone that want to ask a question, go for it. I am going to keep quiet. It's hard for me. Ah, Annika.
Anne-Marie, there's a question in the...
Oh, Annika Greef asked, yeah, why gum and mints on the first case study? I think that was, Stephanie, was that your case study?
Yes, it was. That's a great question. So the sucking of the mints and then the stimulating feeling of the mints is helpful for both like a root or a trunk, but in her case, she gets fatigued, sitting in the meetings and stuff like that. And so finding ways where she can get like a sucking, a proprioceptive input into her body, and then stimulate her to be a little bit more awake. Those are just common regulation tools. And they
Absolutely.
work.
Oh, they work. They work. I love
Imagine
gum. I
that.
love mints. They always work and they are quite universal. So thanks for sharing that, Stephanie. That's really, really awesome. Remember, oral motor is the most primitive, oldest form of self-regulation, and we kind of don't necessarily like it to be food associated, but if it's in a controlled fashion, it works really, really well. Thank you, Stephanie. Awesome. Thanks for that question, Annika. Lizanne, you've got your hand up. Why don't you ask the question? Go for it.
Thank you. My question is also for Stephanie. Thanks for a great presentation. I was wondering how you went about unpacking the results with your client. It seemed like you worked in such a holistic manner with her, and considering the fact that she's such a low root, how did you do it so that it's not overwhelming? Sort of where did you start with her?
Yes, I work where I have one session that's an hour where we just talk about the matrix or get her feedback or how her impression of the matrix is, and then allow her about a week to think about it. And then we'll have another session where we start digging deeper into um, the intervention plan for her. So I took it slower um, because it can get overwhelming. And I didn't focus on more. She could see it, but because she had a multisensory score that was so low, that was really my main focus because I feel like it will address the other things. And so I didn't intentionally do that, but I think it made sense that we really just focused on that one multisensory score primarily.
Mhm.
Thank you so much. That answer your question, Lizanne. I think that's quite a common question. The matrix is quite extensive, but I think small little chunks of pieces. I found I don't do so much one-to-one work anymore, but when I used to do a lot of one-to-one work, it's also sharing it with the client and then start with something that's immediate. I'd always ask what are the things that they want to start with straight away so that you also give them a little bit of autonomy and what is it that they want to do, and these small little pieces. And it's interesting, if you start with one piece, there's often a ripple effect that starting with one actually adds a whole layering, like exactly like Stephanie was saying. And then the insights is often quite profound that people then start to self-correct environment or activity around that. But it's always a good question. Minkateko, I think there's a question in the chat room.
Yes. So Marlies Grindley says, does the sensory profile of trunk predispose one to be the caregiver and accommodate others as a way of being in the world? Is there any chance that this way shows up incorrectly disguised as a trunk in the profile?
Okay. The two questions. No, the profile is 99.9% of the time not wrong. And I've done thousands of them over the years. And the times where I've had people that said, oh, it's wrong, I'm like, okay, come here, come here, come here, let's dig deeper. And every single time that I've done that, it's usually people have got no sense of awareness. Then it's often they're totally projecting or they're not really realizing that. So it's not wrong. However, I would never suggest that you do a matrix when someone is in a really crisis state or going through significant trauma. Or I would also be cautious about women who's pregnant or maybe even women who's going through serious menopause. Just ask, is this how they normally are? So you would ask that question. But then yet again, we sometimes also have to deal with what is it that people are struggling with currently. Are they usually the caregivers? I don't think so, Marlies. We often find that therapists or coaches or caregivers are more prone to be low threshold roots because they are more intuitive and they zone into others quite significantly. And it's interesting, Stephanie, I've seen so many lawyers over the years with really low thresholds. So there's definitely some trends that we are seeing, but it doesn't mean your profile type is going to set you up for success or failure. There are definitely patterns that we are seeing. The more low threshold can't work in a call center, which is why I've done my PhD there. Please don't stuck them in a call center. And if you put me to work in a library, remember, I've got very high thresholds. I'll possibly tear the place down. So there's obvious misfits, but most people in between we can really gear towards making accommodations so that it work in that space. But we do know trunks are very accommodating, very flexible, very mediating in their natural capacity, which does mean that they often don't take care of themselves or don't understand their own needs that well. Thanks for the question, Marlies. It's a great one. I think we've got time for one more, Mankateku.
Yeah, we've got a question from Heather. She says, I've not seen the assessment, but I'm curious how a person who struggles with certain types of noise, but loves, say, listening to music most of the time, how that would come out on an auditory score. How would that complexity be captured?
Yeah. And I'm busy with my statistical analysis constantly. The Sentry Matrix is a multi-dimensional tool. It's not a unidimensional tool. So what happens, you can find three types of score for auditory. You can have a low score, which means people are sensitive. You can have a high score, which means people are seeking, or you could have fluctuations. And fluctuations is then allowing for that complexity. You can have people with both a low and a high threshold, and it will work and it will play out and distribute it like that in the scoring. Because often we might have people who are very sensitive to noise but love music, and then it might come up as a fluctuation. But then you would see it's this type of music. So fluctuations are quite common. It's usually around context. It's also around the type of sensory input. If we look at the touch system, we've got deep touch, we've got light touch, we've got temperature. So every sensory system also consists of a variety of stimulation, which people can score for differently, but it can also be contextually different. And then it will actually be captured like that on the results. Yeah. Stephanie, I think you've got something to add as a
I
final one.
do. I was wondering the same thing when I first started this, but I've actually had two musician clients who have low auditory scores, and we've kind of decided that they feel that it actually helps them be a better musician because they are more fine-tuned to the different sounds. So to add that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And remember, thresholds doesn't mean you can't or you can't. There's no capacity that we are looking at. Thresholds really help us to create as much synergy with activity, environment, relationship, and performance. So yes, it does show us where are our irritations and our distractions, but it's all about having that knowledge and understanding that, which is really, really great. Queen, last final comment from you, and then we have to just close off.
Yeah, that multisensory. I can play loud music when I'm not distracted and easy. And I see that when I'm driving, as soon as I get lost, the first thing that I do is switch off the music.
Push up the music. Yeah,
So it can happen to the same person. And
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. And it can also be across context. There's also how the brain modulate and how the brain discriminate, which happens at two different levels of the brain. So the complexity is quite significant. There's so many layers to it. But which is the nice thing about the matrix, which is why it's been designed in this particular way, to have more layered complexities and variances across each of these different systems, so that when we unpack it for a client, it provides with more nuances. So the process is extremely nuanced. And it's with every single one of our practitioners that actually take this and bring it with their client. It creates such a great opportunity to explore, to learn about yourself, your work, your environment, your activities, and also obviously your relationships. So I'm leaving you with this final quote. It is 1 minute past the hour. The senses, being the explorers of the world, open the way to knowledge. So I love this quote of Maria Montessori. And our times are up, guys. Thank you so much for being here. Queen, Karen, Stephanie, thank you tremendously for sharing your case studies. I so appreciate that. You haven't heard the last of me. I want it written up so that I can help to go to that publication. Nkateko, thank you so much for your help. Every single one of you have put time aside to listen to this. Thank you for being here. Please stay in touch. We hope to see you again and have a wonderful evening. Cheers.